All right, Joe. So the impeachment trial continues today, where we're going to have the senators, I guess, talk for 2 days, and then on Wednesday they take their vote. What is the point of them talking for 2 days? Haven't we heard it all?
Well, the reason they're getting the ability to talk is that they haven't been talking for the entire trial. They've been, as far as we know, submitting some very interesting and sometimes rejected questions for the managers on the House and for the president's legal team in the Senate. This is just an opportunity for them to be part of history, and they are demanding an opportunity to have their say, both pro and con. And so we are going to be treated to something that will be quite boring, but nonetheless, it's pretty predictable. The Democrats have already made it clear that they intend to say that the acquittal, which will occur on Wednesday, is illegitimate because there were no witnesses and there were no documents, which of course is absolutely false. There were many, many witnesses and many, many documents from even the failed House proceedings, the incomplete House proceedings produced evidence that the House itself called overwhelming and sufficient to remove the president from office. So you're left with the cognitive dissonance of the Democrats' arguments about how great their case was and how incomplete it was. Now, if you can understand that the Democrats don't care about sounding stupid, then you can understand exactly why we are where we are.
I want to get your perspective as an attorney on this subject. I was really struck by the fact that the president's defense was bolstered by the bipartisan nature of the lawyers who were arguing for it. In other words, Jonathan Turley in the House, who is a Clinton supporter, he's a Democrat, argued very forcefully that this was an unconstitutional process and certainly a violation of what the founders intended for impeachment. And then you get over to the Senate, and Alan Dershowitz, a lifelong Democrat attorney, is arguing even if you're of the opinion the president did something wrong, this is not impeachable. I thought they were two of the most compelling attorneys in this entire process, Joe.
Well, that's absolutely true. And in fact, it is quite obvious that the president's attorneys had the better arguments and the most consistent with the meaning and intent of the Constitution. As the Wall Street Journal said on Friday, the House impeachment articles process has violated constitutional norms and distorted the separation of powers. And both Turley and Dershowitz emphasized those points beautifully and clearly. Dershowitz was terrific. I really enjoyed his stuff on the floor of the Senate, and it was obvious he was driving Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff mad. In fact, Schiff tried to insult Dershowitz by calling him, quote, a criminal defense attorney, as if there's something bad about that. But in Schiff's mind, to show that Dershowitz was not a constitutional scholar, which of course is ludicrous. He most certainly is a constitutional scholar. So I agree, Vince. The team that the president put together was absolutely superb. And I thought the Democrats were repetitive. I thought their arguments were a bit hacky. And I think the repetition of the same information over and over simply turned people off, and I think it clearly lost the audience that they started out with.
To your point, though, Adam Schiff was on MSNBC, and he said that, and he points to Lamar Alexander, Senator Lamar Alexander, the most recent one, to have said in some way or another that they found the actions of the president inappropriate. So he is claiming that because Republican senators are coming out and saying that the actions were inappropriate, he said the House proved their case, that what the president did was wrong. They're just choosing to ignore all of that and not impeach him, not remove him from office.
Schiff has been doing from the beginning, which is lying. Any port in the storm at this point for him. Lamar Alexander simply said, well, the House had a lousy case. They proved their lousy case, and their lousy case was insufficient because it did not prove an impeachable offense. That's what Lamar Alexander said. He did not find an impeachable offense to have been established by the House. And while he was displeased, he didn't like the call, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know what? I didn't like that Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War, but he wasn't impeached. He got a pass from the Congress. So when you go back and you look at the history of presidential actions, a telephone call to a foreign leader where, in my opinion, by the way, I always thought the defense should have been. There's nothing wrong with a quid pro quo. What the hell's the problem? And basically the Republicans ended up there. That was part of what Dershowitz was arguing, that this type of self-interested telephone call, even only a smidgen self-interested, when the great interest of the United States was in making that call against corruption in Ukraine, was perfectly proper.
Yeah, it's amusing that a bunch of senators would clutch their pearls over the idea that self-interest would motivate a decision. It's like ridiculous. Also, Rand Paul is calling for John Bolton's security clearance to be revoked, and the former national security advisor. Do you think that's well advised?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen because John Brennan still has his security clearance, and you remember that was announced way back after he became the perfidious individual that he has become. This whole thing about security clearances, I would yank them in a New York minute. I think in John Bolton's case, I think the problem with John is that what he's done is quite unseemly. All of these arguments that people are defending him are saying, well, he has a right to write the book. Well, of course he has a right to write the book. But as far as I'm concerned, this is an act of treachery. You don't publish this book before the election. This is not an act of trying to inform history and do a memoir. This is an act of trying to hurt the president of the United States. And by the way, I don't care whether he leaked the book or not. It doesn't matter. The book parts were going to be leaked no matter what. His people knew that, and they put the book out purposely because they know it's going to be published before the next election. Although the government can go in and sue under certain situations to seize all of the profits from his book if it is published before the declassification process is finished under the famous Frank Snepp case from the Supreme Court. And they've done that recently and won, getting the profits from the sales of books. And they might even be able to get John's advance if they choose to do that. So we'll see. But I don't think they're going to revoke John's security clearance. Again, if you're not going to revoke Brennan's, you can't revoke Bolton's.
Joe, very quickly here, Victor Shokan filed a complaint with the Ukraine's National Bureau of Investigation last week, demanding an investigation be opened against Joe Biden and what happened. And he says that the vice president blackmailed the Ukraine, and that's how he lost his job. Do you think that we have any kind of promise of the Ukraine opening an investigation into the Bidens?
I do. I believe that is necessary as well, because what Joe Biden did because of the involvement. If Joe Biden's son doesn't work for Burisma, then everything that Biden does is fine. Again, unseemly, kind of sleazy. But to hear Joe Biden tell it, I mean, he's the one who got Shokan fired. Shokan was, in fact, investigating Burisma and investigating the activities of Hunter Biden. That was extortion because of Biden's son being involved. I believe it did violate Ukrainian law. And I believe there will be an investigation in Ukraine, and there should be. But more important than that, there ought to be one in the United States. What Biden did was criminal activity protecting his son. This was, in fact, extortion in the United States. It was illegal activity. It was a conspiracy involving the activities of his son, Devin Archer, and other people. Let's remember, John Kerry's stepson, refused to join the board of Burisma because he went to the State Department and said, this relationship that Hunter Biden and Devin Archer have with Burisma is unseemly, and I want nothing to do with it. Gee, I wonder why that happened.
Yeah. All right, Joe Digenova, thank you so much. Have a fantastic week. We'll speak to you again next week.